The valet pretended I didn't exist. I pulled my 10-year-old, slightly rusting sedan to a stop on the endless cobblestone driveway, and he just stared right through me. He was busy, of course, with the line of new Lamborghinis and Bentleys that snaked up to the massive estate, glittering under the party lights. This was the Hawthorne family estate, the $100 million cottage my grandfather built, and tonight was my father's 70th birthday gala. My name is Finlow Hawthorne. I'm 35 years old. My family runs a $3.1 billion investment firm, and I am the black sheep, the disappointment, the family joke. Why? Because I didn't want their blood-soaked money. I became an archivist. I work in a dusty university library, I make a normal salary, and I wear suits from a department store, not a personal tailor. I finally just parked my car on the grass, ignoring the valet's angry shout. I grabbed my one good suit jacket and walked toward the massive oak doors and the sound of the orchestra. I was the poor son, and in my family, being poor wasn't just a failure. It was an embarrassment they were about to erase for good. I walked in, wearing my one good suit. The ballroom was dripping with diamonds and money. I tried to find a quiet corner, but my brother, Bernard, found me first. He was the heir apparent, and he looked it, perfectly tailored, holding a glass of champagne, his face already flushed with arrogance. "Well, look, everyone," he said, his voice loud enough for the cluster of bankers nearby to hear. The scholar graced us with his presence. "Did you take the bus, Finlow, or did you finally fix that old wreck?" I ignored him and looked for my father. But then my sister, Cressida, glided over. She was a vision in a silk dress, wrapped in a diamond necklace that was worth more than my entire apartment building. She didn't speak to me. She turned to our mother, who was standing nearby, and whispered. But she whispered loudly on purpose, a performance for her friends. "Mother," she said, waving a manicured hand in front of her nose. "Must he stand near the guests? He smells like old books. It's embarrassing." My mother just gave me a look of pure disappointment. "Finlow, try not to mingle too much. Just stand in the back." I just nodded. This was normal. This was the price of admission for being me. I was the stain they couldn't get out. The party's main event came an hour later. The orchestra stopped. My father, Brown Hawthorne, a man who commanded rooms, took the stage. He was 70, but he looked like a king in his custom tuxedo. "Thank you all for coming," he boomed. Then his eyes found me, hiding in the back by the curtains. A cold smile touched his lips. "We have one final piece of family business tonight." He motioned for me to come up. "Finlow, my son, come up here." The room went dead quiet. 300 pairs of eyes, our family's lawyers, bankers, and rivals, were on me as I walked the long, lonely path to the stage. He put an arm around my shoulder, but it wasn't kind. It was a trap. "My son," he said into the mic, this simple one. "The one who chose books over billions." The crowd tittered. "We, as a family, have decided to give you a clean break. To free you from the burden of our name." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a cashier's check. He held it up for all to see. $50,000. This is your final inheritance, Finlow. You are formally disowned from the family trust. You are free to be the poor, simple man you always wanted to be. The 300 guests gasped. I looked at the check. $50,000. It was an insult. It was less than my sister spent on shoes in a month. I looked past my father's triumphant, smiling face to my siblings in the front row. Bernard and Cressida were smiling, too, raising their champagne glasses in a silent, mocking toast. This was their plan. I knew it. They had finally convinced him to cut out the cancer, to remove the stain. They had finally won. My father was waiting for me to beg. He was waiting for me to cry, to break down, to cause a scene. He wanted me to prove, in front of all these important people, that I was weak, that I was nothing without him. I looked at the check, then at his cold, waiting eyes. I took it from his hand. My own hand didn't shake. I didn't beg. I didn't cry. My heart was hammering, but my face was stone. I just nodded, my voice clear and loud in the silent room. Understood. I calmly folded the check, put it in my inside jacket pocket, turned my back on him, and walked off the stage. I walked right out of the ballroom, past the stunned guests, and into the night. I left them all in the stunned silence they had created for me. I drove home to my small, neat apartment. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel sad. I felt focused. The $50,000 check felt like a burning coal in my pocket. I walked inside my apartment, the one Cressida said smelled like old books, and went to my desk. I didn't turn on the TV. I didn't pour a drink. I just looked at my old paper desk calendar. Today's date, my father's 70th birthday, was circled in thick red ink. I had circled it 5 years ago, the day my grandfather died. And right underneath, in my own neat archival handwriting, I had written, GH Trust expires, 9 a.m. tomorrow. My father, in his arrogance, thought he was disowning me. He thought he was throwing me out. He had no idea. He had just executed his entire family. He thought he was giving me my final inheritance. He didn't know that he was the one who had just been cut off. I knew this was coming. I had been waiting for this exact moment for 1,826 days. They thought they were starting their new, perfect, Finlow-free life. They had no idea that tomorrow at 9 a.m., their real lives, their real poor, simple lives, were about to begin. I sat in my quiet apartment, the $50,000 check on my table like a piece of poison. I didn't feel disowned. I felt activated. My mind went back to the only man in that family who ever mattered, my grandfather, Cornelius. He was the one who built the $3.1 billion empire from nothing but dirt, willpower, and an ocean of ruthlessness. The family, my father included, only remembered him as a tyrant. They were terrified of him. They didn't understand him. But I did. He despised his own son, my father, Brown. He hated my brother Bernard and my sister Cressida. He saw them for exactly what they were. They are vultures, Finlow, his voice, still a rasp in my memory, would say. We'd be in his vast, dark study, a room no one else was allowed in. He'd be staring out the window at the estate they all believed was theirs. They are weak. They circle me, waiting for me to die so they can fight over the corpse. They are soft. They have my name, but they do not have my blood. They are takers, not builders. He was a hard man, but he was the only one who ever told the truth. He saw their greed, their laziness, and their empty, polished lives. And he had decided to punish them for it, in the most complete way possible. My family thought my job was an embarrassment. An archivist. Bernard would laugh at family dinners. A glorified librarian. He files dusty papers for a living while I close $50 million deals. They thought I chose it because I was simple, because I couldn't handle their high-stakes world. They were wrong. My grandfather saw something in me. He saw the boring kid who loved history, the one who didn't ask for a new car for his 16th birthday, but for a rare book. When I got my degree in archival science, Cornelius hired me himself. Not for the firm. Never for the firm. He hired me as his personal archivist. For 5 years, I worked in the sealed, climate-controlled vault beneath his private study, a room my father didn't even know existed. My job wasn't just organizing old papers. My job was learning. I was his memory. I was his confidant. I handled every secret deal, every hidden account, every piece of leverage he held over his rivals, every angry letter from his own son. I learned where every dollar was, how it was made, and where every single body was buried. He wasn't training me to be a librarian. He was teaching me how to be an emperor. In that secret vault, I found the truth. It wasn't in a computer. It was in a 3-inch thick, leather-bound binder. A physical document, locked in a fireproof safe. It was titled GH Trust. And it was the biggest, cruelest joke I had ever seen. The family's wealth was a lie. A complete fabrication. My father, my brother, my sister, they didn't own anything. Not the company. Not the estate. Not the fleet of cars. Not the penthouse in New York or the chalet in Aspen. They didn't even own the diamonds Cressida wore. It was all a mirage. My grandfather, Cornelius, in his cold brilliance, had put the entire $3.1 billion fortune into an ironclad trust 40 years ago. The family, Brown, Bernard, and Cressida, were not owners. They were just beneficiaries. They were living on a massive quarterly allowance. An allowance that Cornelius controlled, even from the grave. They were spoiled children, living in a house their father had built, with money he had earned, and they were too arrogant and too stupid to even check the paperwork. They thought they were kings. They were just high-paid, glorified houseguests. The trust was the cage, but the expiration date was the punchline. Cornelius had structured the trust with the precision of a surgeon. It was not set to expire on the anniversary of his death, or at the end of the fiscal year. No, that was too simple, too clean. I saw the clause in the document, and I remember laughing out loud in that silent vault. It wasn't set to a simple term, like 40 or 50 years. No, Cornelius had been far more cruel. The trust was set to expire and dissolve completely at 9 a.m. on the day after my father, Brown's 70th birthday. This was the final, cold, calculated insult. My grandfather had ensured that his own son would be an old man, as he'd told me, before he could ever dream of touching the real money. He had forced my father to live his entire adult life as a dependent, a prince-in-waiting who would be 70 years old before his coronation. My father had spent his whole life planning this 70th birthday party, seeing it as the day he would finally be free. He and my siblings thought tomorrow was their payday. They thought it was their liberation. They had no idea it was their execution. They were celebrating the end of their allowance, not knowing it was also the end of their lives. My grandfather saw this coming. He knew them. He understood the extent of their greed and the nature of their cruelty. He knew that one day, their embarrassment over me would boil over into a public, final act. And he had laid a trap for them 40 years in the making. I remembered the last meeting, just a week before Cornelius died. He was frail, in his bed, hooked to an oxygen tank. But his eyes were still sharp, still burning with that cold fire. He had called me and his personal lawyer, Mr. Donovan, to his room. My father, Bernard, and Cressida were all waiting downstairs. I could hear them arguing about who would get the lake house. Fools, Cornelius rasped, the oxygen mask hissing. They are absolute fools. They think the trust dissolving means the money is finally theirs. They've never read the fine print. They've never read the real will. Mr. Donovan produced a single, thin document. It wasn't the 300-page tome the family lawyers had. It was simple. It was a final, superseding will. I was the only witness. I signed it, my hand steady. Cornelius looked at me, a rare, thin smile on his lips. They think you are the failure, Finlow. They will never respect you. A day will come, son, when they will try to throw you out, to cast you aside because you are not like them. They will try to disown you from the scraps they think they own. He coughed, a dry, painful sound. But it doesn't matter. Let them. Let them have their little moment. Because I claimed you years ago. This is the real disinheritance. Not for you, son. For them. Now go. And don't come back until it's time to take out the trash. Later that night, I went to bed and slept for exactly 4 hours, a deep, dreamless sleep. I woke up at 7 a.m., made my usual black coffee, and sat at my desk, reading a chapter on the Histories by Herodotus. I was calm. I was centered. The $50,000 check was sitting on my table, right where I left it, a paper trophy of their arrogance. At exactly 8:01 a.m., my phone exploded. It buzzed so hard on the wooden table, it sounded like a jackhammer. It was Bernard. I let it ring twice, took a sip of coffee, and answered. Finlow, he shouted. He wasn't just talking. He was giddy, his voice high and strained. I could hear Cressida laughing in the background. Where are you, you little bookworm? Get down to Donovan's office. The lawyers are here. The champagne is popped. We're finally finalizing the transfer. The day is finally here. He was practically singing. I suppose you can come and watch, if you want to see what you lost. It might be educational. His laugh was a bark. He thought he was calling to rub salt in my wounds. He had no idea he was my alarm clock. I wouldn't miss it, Bernard, I said, my voice perfectly flat. I'll be there. I hung up before he could say another word. I finished my coffee, put on my one good suit, the smelly one, and slid the $50,000 check into my pocket. I arrived at the law office at 8:55 a.m. It was the top floor of a glass skyscraper that, unknown to them, I was about to own. I walked into the massive mahogany-walled conference room. They were already there. My father, Brown, my brother, Bernard, and my sister, Cressida. And they were drinking. At 9 a.m., an ice bucket with 3 bottles of $5,000 champagne was on the table. They were celebrating my father's 70th and the death of their grandfather. Ah, the prodigal son returns, my father boomed, his face red and triumphant. Come to beg for scraps, Finlow? Was the $50,000 not enough to cover your library fines? Bernard and Cressida howled with laughter. Don't be cruel, father, Cressida said, wiping a tear from her eye. He can have my old car. The one with the scratch. As a congratulations for nothing. They were so happy, so arrogant, so completely sure they had won. They looked at me with a mixture of pity and disgust, this small, poor man who had been cast out. I just stood by the door, my hands clasped in front of me, and waited. Their laughter was the prelude to their funeral. The heavy doors of the conference room opened at 9:01 a.m. The laughter died instantly. Mr. Donovan walked in. Donovan was not the family's lawyer. My family used slick, young sharks in bright suits. Donovan was Cornelius's lawyer. He was 80 years old, stern, dressed in a thick wool suit that was 30 years out of style. He was a relic of a different time, a man who operated on loyalty and honor, 2 words my family didn't understand. He carried a single, worn leather briefcase. His eyes scanned the room. He saw my father, my brother, and my sister, and his gaze was pure disdain. He looked at their champagne flutes, and his lip curled slightly. A bit early for a wake, wouldn't you say, Mr. Hawthorne? He said to my father. Brown just scoffed. We celebrate, Donovan. You should try it. Donovan's eyes then found me, standing by the door. His entire demeanor changed. His face softened, just a fraction. He gave me a single, respectful nod. Mr. Finlow, thank you for being punctual. My family didn't notice. They were too busy. Let's get on with it, Bernard snapped, tapping his watch. Donovan looked at him. Let us begin. Mr. Donovan placed his briefcase on the table and opened it. He pulled out a thick, leather-bound document. We will begin with the primary matter, he said, his voice filling the room. The Hawthorne Family Trust. Bernard leaned forward, his eyes shining. Donovan put on a pair of small, round glasses. As stipulated by its founder, Cornelius Hawthorne, the Hawthorne Family Trust, established 40 years ago, was set with a specific expiration. It was to be dissolved on the day following Brown Hawthorne's 70th birthday. As of 9 a.m. today, that trust is officially dissolved. The cheer that came from my brother was animalistic. Yes, he screamed, slamming his fist on the table. Cressida squealed and threw her arms around our father. We're free. We're finally free. Brown, his face a mask of pure triumph, stood up and raised his glass. It's over. The old man's grip is finally gone. To me, to the new head of Hawthorne Global. He drank his champagne in one gulp. I just sat there, watching the dead men celebrate. They were cheering their own execution. They had heard the lock, but they hadn't heard the click of the gun. I let the celebration last for a full 10 seconds. Then I cleared my throat, very quietly. But Mr. Donovan didn't need the cue. He held up a hand. Please sit down, Mr. Hawthorne. We are not finished. The room quieted, annoyed. As I was saying, Donovan continued, his voice flat, the trust is dissolved. He read the next line. Consequently, all stipends, all allowances, all properties, all lines of credit, and all assets associated with said trust are, as of this moment, terminated. The smiles faded. They just froze. Brown, who was still standing, looked confused. What does that mean? He asked, his voice no longer booming. Terminated? What's terminated? Cressida forced a laugh. He means they are transferred to us, father. Right, Donovan? The trust is gone, so the money is ours. Bernard was not laughing. He was staring at Donovan, his face pale. Donovan, what does terminated mean? He asked, his voice suddenly small, the giddiness gone. It means exactly what it says, Mr. Bernard, Donovan said, looking at him over his glasses. The money is gone. The cars are no longer yours. The houses you live in are no longer available to you. Your allowance has been terminated. It means you own nothing, Mr. Donovan said, his voice cutting through the stunned silence. My father, Brown, just stared at him, his face a mask of confusion. What do you mean nothing? The trust is dissolved. The money is ours. It's my money. No, Mr. Hawthorne. It was never your money, Donovan said, his voice devoid of emotion. It was Cornelius's money. The trust was simply the vehicle for your allowance. Now that the trust is gone, he paused, letting the words hang in the air. Which brings us to the final will and testament of Cornelius Hawthorne. Bernard, who had gone pale, finally spoke. The final will? We read the will. It's standard. It just said the trust's contents would be distributed to the beneficiaries. Donovan gave him a cold smile. You read the will your grandfather let you read, Mr. Bernard. The one he knew you were all expecting. He reached back into his briefcase and pulled out a different document. It wasn't the thick, bound volume they knew. It was a single, thin folder. This, he said, is the real one. The final, superseding will, executed 1 week before his death. A will that invalidates all previous versions. As Donovan placed the thin folder on the table, my mind flashed back to my grandfather's cold, calculating words. I was in the vault with him, just months before he died, organizing his earliest financial records. They threw me out, Finlow, he'd whispered, his eyes on a faded photo of his own parents. When I was 30, trying to build this. Your father, Brown, was just a boy, but his mother, she and her family, they thought I was a failure. They called me poor. They said I was chasing fantasies. They disowned me. He had tapped the glass on the photo, his finger frail but steady. I built this $3 billion empire just to prove them wrong. And I promised myself, they will never make that mistake again. They will never underestimate a man they call poor. Your father, your siblings, they have their blood. They think that makes them worthy. They will learn, Finlow. At the very end, they will all learn. He had created that ironclad trust 40 years ago as a cage, setting the expiration date for Brown's 70th birthday, and this final will. This was the lock. This was his ultimate, cold revenge, delivered from the grave. Mr. Donovan opened the thin folder. The room was so quiet I could hear the ice melting in the champagne bucket. I will read the relevant sections, he said. He put on his glasses and began. I, Cornelius Hawthorne, being of sound mind and body, declare this to be my final testament. His voice was a flat, emotionless drone, which made the words even more brutal. My children and their children, save one, have spent their entire lives proving themselves to be lazy, greedy, and weak. I saw my father flinch, as if he'd been slapped. Cressida let out a small, wounded sound. Donovan continued, They are takers, not builders. They are polished shells, hollow on the inside. They have waited for my death like vultures, believing my wealth was their right. Bernard started to say something, but Donovan just looked at him, and he shut his mouth. Therefore, I leave them nothing but the memory of the wealth they were too foolish to earn. I leave them nothing. Nothing. Cressida whispered, her face white. What does he mean, nothing? He means nothing, Miss Hawthorne, Donovan said, without looking up from the page. He continued reading. The entirety of my estate. He paused as if for effect. Valued at $3.1 billion, including all properties, all stocks, all offshore holdings, all liquid and non-liquid assets, and a 100% controlling interest in Hawthorne Global. My father, Brown, was now leaning on the table, his knuckles white. He was finally understanding. He was 70 years old, and he was realizing, in this single horrible moment, that his entire life had been a lie. Donovan's voice was like a hammer, striking again and again. Bypasses my son, Brown Hawthorne. My father made a choking sound. Bypasses my grandson, Bernard Hawthorne. Bernard just shook his head, muttering, No, no, no. And bypasses my granddaughter, Cressida Hawthorne Jones. Cressida finally broke. She let out a single, sharp sob, like a wounded animal. Who? She whispered. Who else is there? Who gets it? Mr. Donovan took a slow, deliberate breath. He looked up from the will, his eyes scanning the 3 broken, horrified faces of my family. He was savoring this. This was the moment his loyalty to my grandfather was finally paid in full. Then his eyes met mine, and he gave me that same, small nod from earlier. He looked back down at the page and read the final line. And is bequeathed, in its entirety, to the only member of my family who ever understood its value. The only one who ever worked a real day in his life. The only one who never asked me for a single dollar. He paused, then read the name. To my confidant, my archivist, my grandson, Finlow Hawthorne. The silence that followed was not quiet. It was a vacuum. It was the sound of 3 lives, 3 empires built on arrogance, being vaporized in a single perfectly spoken sentence. The poor son. The simple one. The man who smelled like old books. I had it all. The silence lasted for 3 full seconds. It was the sound of a universe ending. It wasn't quiet. It was a vacuum, sucking all the life and arrogance out of the room. Brown's face was white, then a splotchy, sick purple, then white again. Cressida was making a small, choking sound, like a drowning bird. It was Bernard who broke. He leaped to his feet, his chair smashing against the mahogany wall behind him. "This is a lie," he screamed, his voice cracking like a teenager's. "It's a joke. He's a gardener. He's a librarian. He's nothing." He lunged, not at me, but at Mr. Donovan, trying to snatch the will from his hands. Donovan, despite his 80 years, was faster. He snapped the folder shut and held it to his chest as Bernard grabbed at his suit jacket. He tricked him. He's a con artist. He's a simpleton he couldn't have. "Mr. Bernard Hawthorne, I advise you to unhand me," Donovan said, his voice like ice. "Or I will have you removed." "This is fraud," Bernard roared, his face crimson. "I will sue. I will take this to court. He will never see a dime." Donovan just looked at him, unfazed. "I assure you, it is ironclad. I was there. And as for the executor, Mr. Finlow Hawthorne helped draft it. He is the executor." The fight just evaporated. The word executor was the final fatal blow. It was the bullet after the stab wound. Bernard stumbled back from Donovan, his face a mask of disbelief. He looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time in his life. He wasn't seeing his poor little brother. He was seeing a stranger, a ghost, a man he had never bothered to know. "You," he whispered, his voice full of a new, dawning horror. You, this was you?" I didn't say a word. I just stood up from my place by the door. I walked slowly, deliberately, to the head of the table, my footsteps the only sound in the room. I reached into my simple suit jacket, the one Cressida said smelled of old books. I pulled out the $50,000 cashier's check they had given me last night, their final, arrogant insult. I looked at my father. Brown was still standing, his champagne glass still in his hand, his arm limp at his side. He was just staring at the check in my hand, his world, his power, his entire 70-year-long coronation gone. I calmly slid the check across the polished mahogany table until it stopped, perfectly, in front of him. "You'll need this," I said, my voice quiet but clear. "More than I do." Bernard just muttered, "No, no, no," over and over, sinking into his chair. Cressida was now openly sobbing, her head on the table, her $10,000 a month allowance gone. "My house," she was whispering into her arms. "My car, oh God, my allowance." My father, Brown, just stared at the check, his 70-year-old mind finally processing the absolute, total nature of his ruin. Mr. Donovan, seeing his duty was almost done, snapped his briefcase shut with a loud final click. "We are not finished," he said, and the room went silent again. "Mr. Hawthorne's first act as CEO," he said, nodding to me, "is to call in all family debts." He looked at Brown. "The estate you live in is not yours. It is owned by Hawthorne Global. You have 48 hours to vacate." He turned to Bernard. "Your penthouse is leased by the company. The lease is terminated. You have 24 hours. He turned to Cressida. "Your cars, your credit lines, your club memberships, they are all, as of 9 a.m. this morning, canceled." He looked at all 3 of them. "Security is waiting outside this room to escort you from the building. And from the properties. Do not bother going home." I stood up. I had seen enough. The vultures, as my grandfather called them, had been defanged, declawed, and grounded. Permanently. I gave a small nod to Mr. Donovan. "Thank you for your professionalism, Donovan. You have honored my grandfather's wishes perfectly." "It was my distinct pleasure, Mr. Hawthorne," he said, a small, grim smile touching his lips. I walked toward the door. "Wait!" I heard a voice cry out. It was Brown. My father. I turned. He was standing, his face crumpled, his eyes wild. He was holding the $50,000 check. "Finlow, son, you can't. You can't do this. I'm your father." "No," I said, my voice cold, stopping him in his tracks. "You're just the man who threw me out for being poor. Last night, you gave me my final inheritance. This," I said, gesturing to the room, to their broken lives, "is me giving you yours." I walked out of the law office, past my sobbing sister and my screaming, broken brother, who was being held back by security. I walked into the hallway, took a deep breath, and stepped into the elevator, my heart pounding, but my mind perfectly, finally clear. The elevator doors opened onto the ground floor lobby. A new man in a black suit I'd never seen before was waiting for me. He nodded respectfully. "Mr. Hawthorne, your car is ready." He led me out of the building, not to the parking garage, but to the front curb. The 10-year-old sedan I had parked there this morning was gone. In its place was a gleaming, black car. The one that used to be my grandfather's, the one I had kept in a private garage for 5 years. The man opened the back door for me. Mr. Donovan was already inside, waiting. "A seamless transition," Donovan said as I slid in. "Your grandfather would be proud, sir. What are your first orders?" The car pulled silently away from the curb, passing Bernard, who was now screaming at a security guard on the sidewalk. I looked out the window as we passed my old, reliable sedan, which was now parked 2 blocks away with a parking ticket on the windshield. I smiled. My first order: sell the jets. Sell the penthouses. Liquidate the vanity projects. All of it. Donovan nodded, already typing on his phone. I paused. And my second: double the funding for the university's archival department. The poor life suited me. I had the $3 billion fortune. But more importantly, I had justice. And I had kept my promise to my grandfather.